everybody. Happy to be here and to have a conversation, which I'm sure you've all been a part of in some form, shape, or fashion on diversity, inclusivity. We talk about belonging, and we added a new word today called equity instead of equality. And I learned something new recently about equality and equity. Equality is giving people equal opportunity. I will talk louder. I've never had a problem not talking.
I know.
Oh, hey.
Equality, giving people equal opportunity. Equity, everyone starts at a different place. And someone gave me a perfect example of if you're going to a concert and you're standing on the floor and you're this tall, which I am, and someone else is this tall, they still can see better than you. And so we all have different starting points. And how do we really, truly create a culture of belonging? We need to think about people for who they are, where they're coming from, and give everyone access so that everyone can have equal opportunity. So I thought that was really a nice nuance and things that we need to take into consideration. So we're thrilled to be here, and I would love to start with each of you telling me who you are, what you do, and why in the last, I'd say, 2 years has this been the hottest topic to date, where we talk about the problems, and of course, from my perspective, it's starting to look for advancing solutions for change so we can stop talking about it, right?
Absolutely. So my name is Joanna Pena-Bickley. I am formerly the head of the design of Internet of Things at AWS, but now currently the head of design and research for Alexa devices for Amazon. For me, I think, equity and equality do go hand in hand. And I look at it from the place of, where people start. I love that analogy because I think the thing that we find with our customers when we are designing for our customers is that everybody starts from a different place. And so there is no one universal solution to some of the problems that we face. I mean, if you think about it for a second, we're facing social problems, right? Social inequality. We've got economic injustices, and we've got ecological injustices. And I think that there's this really interesting opportunity right now to start placing some of that fervor and excitement behind it. But the one thing that I will say is that we've got 3 women up here. I think a part of the reason we're having the conversation is because I think that we do have women in leadership positions. And so it is incumbent upon us to be responsible, right? And not just admire the problem, but actually do something about it.
Well,
and I think, Helena,
it's not just for
that's
women.
right. Yeah, and Helena, I want you to introduce yourself. But Helena has a remarkable practice that works in manufacturing. You and I were just having a conversation about this. So go ahead.
Absolutely, thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you for teeing up so beautifully for me. Hello, everybody. I'm Helena Lisachuk, and I lead the Internet of Things practice at Deloitte. Now, some of you may think Deloitte is like more accounting, tax advisory, maybe strategy firm, but I have been part of this super exciting journey when we as a company are transforming. And we are transforming in terms of what we do for our customers, but we are also transforming as organization ourselves. So I would say 2 years ago, right, I could never imagine myself sitting here and talking about, hey, let's confront some of those wicked problems and wicked issues, and women have extremely strong voice. And I'm proud to lead our team globally, being a woman, and also being surrounded by a super, super diverse team of people that are also, I'm based in Amsterdam, by the way, and a lot of them are foreigners, but they call our team home, and that makes me very proud. And if somebody calls like a foreign place home and has a purpose, then a lot of these wicked problems can be addressed. Equality, inequality, inclusion, many things. If you have the kind of minds working together, regardless of race, gender, preferences, and age, working together. And in manufacturing space, it's just one of the industries where we work, where you have to deal with, like some of the things that we see were built in the 50s, right? And now you're trying to talk about how does it go and connect to the cloud. So it's fantastic. The technology kind of drives the whole context, but you need to be super prepared to speak multiple languages and to be able to convey your argument. And I will save some other examples for later, so I'll just pause. But I'm extremely happy to be here, share some of the views, and maybe at the end we'll call for action. I don't know. It's up to you.
Sounds good to me.
Yes.
You're the boss. Can I just ask you to tilt your chair a little? Because I would love everyone there to be able to see you.
Of course. Absolutely.
So let's
Sure.
Just tilt your chair a little bit.
Is it
that
better?
Better for you guys?
Yeah?
Okay, good.
Sorry,
Just
don't mean to be disrespectful. Yes.
No, it's perfect. I just
Yeah.
want, I'm the co-founder of hashtag See Her. See her. I want everyone
Yeah.
to see you. So let's go there, because you brought up the diversity is not just about gender, race, age. We often forget to talk about age, intersectionality, religion, all of those things. But ultimately, it leads to diversity of thought. And, we talk about diversity of thought. We all talk about diversity is good for business. We all know the numbers. If we close the wage gap, we can add over $4.3 trillion to the global GDP by 2025. We can add over $28 trillion to the global GDP, the US GDP, 4.3 million, 28 trillion global GDP. We know that diversity is good for business. But when we talk about diversity of thought, and Joanna, you talked about Alexa and working on that, why do we need more diversity of thought, especially when we're programming AI and all kinds of things that, of course, the more data in, the smarter it gets, but we still have human data going in, right?
That's correct. It's that humans are actually bringing the data in, and you have humans that are designing the skills. I think one of the things that has been so rewarding about the role that I'm in right now is very similar to Helena. I represent a group, an incredibly diverse group of women, of people from all over the world. And the other part of this is people with many different abilities. And I bring this up because so often we don't necessarily think about just even the diversity of thought, but 1 in 4 Americans has a cognitive disability. And so when you look around the table at your team and you ask yourself, who from that community is representing the customer base that is going to be a potential user? It's a really important thing as both a hiring leader and as a designer, that what you are not doing is designing for that community, but designing with that community. And I think that's a real key distinction in a very Amazonian leadership principle, is that we not just check our biases at the door, but that we are constantly calling into question our own assumptions.
Well, it's interesting because I learned something else new the other day that is just so right. And to me, language, lexicon is going to be a very important element in defining the change and the transformation that we need to make. It's not just about representation. You can put representatives at the table. It's about reflection, and that you need to see yourself there. And if we ask ourselves the question in any decision we make, because we might look the same, but do we see ourselves? And if you ask that question in anything you're doing, from design to storytelling to marketing to media, and say, do I see myself? And that's where the different perspectives really come into,
Absolutely. I'll give you a really great example, one of which just happened this Thanksgiving. So I am the daughter of a woman of color. So I come from a very small, actually big Latinx community in San Antonio, Texas. Anybody from Texas in the room? Nobody?
Yay!
Yay! Okay, contingent. And one of the things, when we talk about lexicon and the way that people speak and the way that people behave, it's often bound in a culture, right? And connectivity is cultural, and it is culturally different in every space. So the way that my, Latina mother, who, Spanglish is our first language in the home, the first thing that she's going to connect with Alexa is actually in being able to code switch a bit with the technology. Now, we would have never known that unless we had really listened to our customers and worked backwards.
Wait, say that again.
Code switch.
Can you
So
explain that?
absolutely, code switching happens to be that when you are raised in, I can speak from a Spanish perspective, in a Spanish-speaking home, Most of us were taught that you don't speak Spanish outside the home. For good or for bad, that's what you were taught, because a part of being accepted in the American workforce was being completely fluent in English. So there is a Spanglish code that happens in our homes that we speak in our own community, and that is our kind of secret code. And so the representation around the table and having AI understand that secret code, not to take over the conversation, but to understand it and assist it and augment it in a way that helps somebody complete a task, is really critical. And one of them was the way that we just do recipes. The way that my mother sets a timer for a turkey is completely different than the way that I would. Well, I will tell you, she's going to give you the time in Spanish. And she might start the sentence in English and time in Spanish. And so the technology has to be.
Does her turkey come out moist?
You know what, her turkey is delicious, and it's got a little spice to it, too.
I need to start doing that, because mine
It's a very special.
It's a very special turkey. Turkey a la mexicana, right?
Because I didn't put the timer in Spanish. Darn it.
So, but that just gives you an example of that it is not just important to have multilingualism as a part of it, but also representing that ability to code switch in those moments when you are setting a timer, or some of our on-the-go products. We don't think, we may act and behave a certain way in one space and context, but most humans, when we find our comfort zone and in our own communities, we act a very different way. And so having a companion that understands that, because that's what Alexa is a companion who is going to be there and learn with you, whether you are in your home. If you have a pair of Echo Buds, that might be on the go, right? If you're in your automotive, you can talk to Alexa today in your Echo Auto. In all of those contexts, we have different modalities, but we also have different codes. And I can assure you that my Spanish in my car behind the wheel is way different than my Spanish and emotion in the boardroom.
Well, doesn't have to be. Just saying.
Can I just extend a little bit this whole language conversation? I find it fascinating. So I was born in Ukraine. I moved as a teenager to US, lived here for 25 years, moved to the Netherlands a few years ago. And I just got my car, and I'm trying to give voice commands, and I tried it in a couple of languages, and the only thing that thing understands is English. Mm-hmm. So it was quite limiting. But it's interesting, because at home we have Alexa, and of course we have Siri, and my 7-year-old daughter, who is bilingual, and now she's picking up 2 other languages. The communication style, if she is just having kind of like an everyday normal conversation, this is all in Dutch. Mm-hmm. If she really wants to make a point, she uses English. Mm-hmm. And she really stresses. So it's quite interesting. Within my team, we have several languages spoken. It's a small group of people, but there are quite a few languages. And we switch it, but then you kind of have this like a special code language almost, like, and it's like a semi-English, semi-Dutch, semi-something else, but it just works. And it brings people together. It makes it special. It makes them feel included. It gives like a little bit of this creation of a nucleus to some extent. And the language is a big part of it, of course.
It absolutely is. And I think one of the things that as we look around reInvent, whether, we talk a lot about voice, but visual recognition. Mm-hmm. And the visual recognition of perhaps what you're wearing might be signifying something of where you come from, and the ability to be able to extend that knowledge of belonging to you is, I think, super important. That often we think about designing for humans, and humans don't just have the ability to see, they can hear, they can taste, they can touch. We think about the 5 senses. In our world, I always look at it as, what's the 6th sense that you need, right? How can we augment with a superpower that gives you an ability that is going to improve your day, not make it harder, right? And I think so much of that does have to do with representation, does have to do with remembering that somebody who is starting a conversation with our Alexa may be a first-time user, right? And we shouldn't be in the business of disenfranchising anyone. Yeah. And so there is an enormous amount of intent and I would say investment placed on the idea that we should be reflective of our customer base. And so when you think about everybody, how many of you are Prime members? Thank you very much.
Obsessed.
Yeah. So when you think about it from the perspective of I looked through the room and I saw lots of hands go up and the diversity just in this room, am I actually being equitable to the person for the first time in their first language, and hopefully assisting them with their first love, right? What is that minimum lovable product that we're going to design that's going to help you just a little bit more? And so what might work for one community, we often see in a different community. And the exciting thing for me has been the inclusion of seeing disabled designers, whether that is a cognitive disability, that is a physical disability, bringing them not just to the table to give us ideas, but actually including them in our design process. I have to tell you that one of the most ingenious things I recently saw was people with low vision. One of our latest innovations that we just put out right before Thanksgiving was the Echo Shows. And in the Echo Shows, you now have the ability to show Alexa just about anything in your household, and she's going to tell you what it is. And so if you think about someone who works in a low vision, which in an aging society we talked a little bit about, right? Ensuring that, sometimes those ingredients labels, I don't know about you, but I'm having to pick up my glasses and really look at it. And when I was thinking about my mom, she's having a harder time. Somebody who's in her 70s still being and staying independent. And so we wouldn't have come to those solutions, and those solutions don't come to the table by able-bodied people. It's by having somebody with low vision on the team to go, this is all it takes. You don't have to over-engineer it.
Yeah, but what is able? I mean, disability is a negative word for some reason. The word dis is a negative word. Disability is sometimes our greatest ability.
That's right.
And so everyone has abilities. And one of the things that really bothers me is, as we talked about, the lexicon. And Catalyst has done such an amazing job. Let's play a game. I go off script. Do you mind?
Let's go.
I'm not going to ask you these questions. I'm just going to go for it. So, Catalyst did something great where, oftentimes there's words that create negative associations. So I'm going to give you a negative word. Give me the positive of it, right? How many men have ever been told they're too bossy? Raise your hands. No one.
Just a few.
At home or at work? How many women have been told they're too bossy? Okay, so it's not a perception. You just saw reality in action. I didn't ask you any of this in advance, right? But what is the opposite? Sheryl Sandberg says you're not too bossy, you're the boss. Right? Beyonce says you're not too bossy, you're the boss. Sheryl Sandberg says you're not too bossy, you have executive presence. You're too emotional. How many times have you heard you're too emotional?
I wish I had a dime for every time I was told that.
Exactly,
You
right?
would be a billionaire.
That's
so
right.
What's the positive? I'm not too emotional, I'm...
Passionate.
And you definitely are. I'm not too emotional.
I'd like to make sure you understand how I feel.
Exactly. Or if I use the word, sometimes people look at introvert as a negative. What's the positive of introvert?
Focused.
Yeah, focused. I think wise.
I'm not an introvert. I'm thoughtful. I'm focused. You think about these words, and if we just flip the script a little bit, and I'm not disabled. I mean, I have ability. When you don't have a sense, you have a stronger other sense.
Sure. I'm going to share with you just a quick personal story. So, and it's actually taken me probably a good 30 years to actually readily admit it in public.
So you're 40, so you were 10.
Stop. I'm 46. Very proud of the age there. But you know what? When I was coming up through school, I had a cognitive disability. And I think sometimes also embracing the word and actually just kind of owning that space. It really wasn't until my 40s that I actually began to tell people that I am severely dyslexic. And what I have used throughout my life, it has been the superpower, the way that I actually see the world differently. It has been something that has been this thread. What I realized, you hit 40 and you have a couple of ahas and you say, wait a minute, I shouldn't be ashamed of this thing. It's actually made me a lot of money. It's put me in positions of incredible power. And if I don't talk about it, there's some 7-year-old little girl who still can't read, which was me. I couldn't read till I was in the 3rd grade. You look at it and you say, she will not see that reflected in leadership. And so sometimes it's also just giving people the space to kind of find their comfort level with saying, I have a disability. I have a disability that actually makes me look at the world upside down.
But that's an
and
ability.
so that is an ability. And so as a designer, I see a very different world. And it has helped me be both kind of that, connect the dots both in technology and in the art world.
But it also has given you the visual power because you are a visualizer. And
Right.
so that is your greatest strength. And so I just want to ask Elena, we just talked about superpower. Joanna talked about her superpower and how she learned to use her disability as actually her strength. What's your superpower?
Oh my gosh. I don't think I have superpower per se, or I think probably, okay, I was born Gemini. And this is, to some people it's like special ability. Some people call it disability because you are very much conflicted when you make your decisions, when you express some things. And actually, I drove a lot of positive things from this. So I do joke about it, and I have a lot of sort of humor when the decisions are made or stories being told. I said, look, come on, for me, it's this, and both are right. And don't call me bipolar, don't give a label about this, but you have to be able to see always 2 sides of the story. And this is actually something that I started effectively using because it might be a benefit when you're just in business. It might be a specific business benefit, but there could be some really serious drawbacks to consider. And you need to find a common ground. And you have to do it subconsciously, and then you need to kind of do it within the teams. And partially, this is maybe what makes a lot of my team members feel very inclusive because there is no bad opinion, there is no wrong opinion. At the end of the day, you have an opinion or you have a question, you don't have bad questions. And then it's about having a dialogue and actually even provoking a dialogue because you can be so vastly different in your views, because at the end of the day, you need to come to a common solution and a common approach. So yeah, I would say sometimes I kind of play devil's advocate even with myself or with anybody in the room. And at the end of the day, it's all about like a step forward, but more inclusive step forward, more considered.
But that's a superpower.
Well, possibly.
Being an inclusive leader, listener, collaborator, and making sure that everyone's voice and opinion is heard is a talent. And if more of us had that talent, we would be moving further, faster, that is for sure. So you both are women in technology. We know the stats. You can put them upside down, inside out.
Yeah.
We know the stats
We
of
live 'em,
women in
yeah.
tech. Have you had challenges being a woman in tech?
Never.
How much time do we got?
We should write a book.
Yes, maybe, actually, I would.
Yeah.
So, what have you, found your challenges to be, and how have you risen the ranks to such senior leaders?
There were multiple. I think it's sort of a journey, right? So it started when I was in the engineering school, and there were 4 of us, ladies, and 80 guys. So
4 women
4 women,
and 80 guys.
80,
Okay.
not 18.
Yeah, good,
80, right?
interesting
So being a
odds.
semiconductor engineer was not hot back then, whatever, so ladies were not very attracted to it. So you kind of learn this, and I just genuinely liked what I was doing. So, I mean, I was using these old-fashioned thyristors and transistors, and I was making jewelry for my, like earrings and stuff. So, high tech, right?
Yeah.
So I was just having fun, and it was great. Now, three of my classmates didn't just abandon engineering the moment one became like a very successful, she has her own show on a TV or something. So it's cool, right? And I was not even thinking about it. But then as I joined the workforce, I got a couple of other degrees. But I started realizing that as you sort of try to express your opinion, there are less and less ladies. And I think my first hard awakening moment was we were in a boardroom just talking about a project. And I was the only female. And frankly, everybody thought I was a secretary. And they asked me to bring coffee for everybody. And I was like, well, I'm the one presenting, actually. So it was, I think a lot of ladies had probably similar experience because you're kind of immediately, well, come on, that blondie, whatever. Go get us some coffee. And that, it never ever made me angry or bitter. I just thought, well, maybe next time I shouldn't be sitting that close to the coffee machine. So let's get smarter. And I think I worked either in software world or in consultancy. And was surrounded by primarily men. So two conclusions, again, without being bitter, but just kind of learning and doing things better the next time. I somehow gravitated and found the ladies that were like a CIO of a large medical system, a lady. A founder of an electronic medical record company, a lady. Couple of more colleagues, superpower ladies. And I just started watching them, getting close to them, saying, hey, could you be my mentor? And you just kind of need to learn a little bit. But these ladies, they made me who I am. And I'm extremely grateful for them. And one of them said, hey, look, you know what? Every thank you told me, I don't want to hear it. Don't thank me for anything. Here is my baton. I supported you and all the ladies. Now it's your job to do exactly the same. So this is my job on my team, and to get first more ladies, which is not easy in technology, but you know what? You don't have to be a semiconductor engineer. You can be an artist, and you can be extremely effective in IoT. So this is very inclusive. It's like phenomenal field because no matter what you studied will be relevant.
Yeah. So it is, and it's actually the culmination of where I think the idea of STEAMed education comes in. We've spoken so much about just STEM for many, many years. And when it comes to IoT, because we are working with the real world, because we're working in a machine world, right, that I find that it is the women in the arts and design, adding them to usually male-dominated teams is the greatest equilibrium one could ask for in that world. Because whether it is a microprocessor or it's in a manufacturing line, what we are inevitably doing in IoT is actually reformulating the way that people are going to work for the next 100 years. And so to ensure that we have women at the table and helping shape what that looks like and how those processes work is so critical to that.
Yeah, and first of all, I just have to say to Elena, when I was asked to get coffee, I would say, I will if you take the notes. I'm like,
I love that. I will use that next time.
It works. I'm telling you, it's just not very complicated.
I love that.
Thank you. It's just not complicated. Okay, so let's go to not complicated. Let's have this conversation because we said we're not just going to admire the problems, but we're going to create solutions for change. And some of them are low-hanging solutions. So let's talk about some solutions. What are some easy things that we can do that will advance diversity, equity, inclusivity, and as the title says, create a culture of belonging in the workplace today? Let's just play with some good ideas.
Sure. I think one of them is actually getting out of our comfort zones and going to communities that we don't usually visit. I think one of the things that I sincerely try to do is go into communities of color, go back home to my Latina community, so that what you begin is to see the representation in your own communities. You know, Shelley, I think you and I have worked together, whether it was through here or my work at IBM, but what we know is if you cannot see it, it's very hard to dream and be something, right? And so in order to close that gap, it's about us kind of sometimes coming out of our ivory towers or out of the airplanes and taking that time to go and work in communities of color or the disability community, and actually putting forth ideas not on them but with them, right? Having us not just visit, but actually get ingrained in understanding that the problems are nuanced. You know, so many of the problems around gender and the intersectionality of gender are incredibly nuanced. So that when I talk with women of color, not just bringing them to the table, that's one way of doing it, but actually visiting them where they are and empowering them to solve the problems that exist in their communities with their ideas, and being able to put forth, you know, not just the dream, but the skills, the path. And the most important part, we talked about mentorship, but I cannot express how important it is to bring sponsorship to this. Who are you going to go back and what community are you going to sponsor into? They have great ideas, wonderful ideas, but we can all just talk about them, or we can actually make them happen. And I think the big thing about reInvent for me has been, this is a community of builders and makers. And so let's go from design thinking and talking to design doing in communities where it really matters. Because inevitably, I actually had a wonderful conversation just this morning about water rights with indigenous people. And you start to think about, wait a minute, you know, there are places in America that still don't have clean water. And you know, the work that we have in IoT, right, or in connected devices or AI, is to actually bring forth the resources to under-resourced communities. But it isn't for us to impose our ideas of what the right thing it is. It's actually about hopefully orchestrating a conversation to happen in those communities. And so for me, bringing that sponsorship of not just the information, but the tools and the know-how, and teaching somebody else to fish for a second to be able to solve the problems in their communities. And I think that's the path forward.
And the consistency. You
That's
can't
right.
just show up and disappear. I mean, that is just
That's absolutely
not
correct.
the real deal. And you know, I have to tell you, you find things in the craziest places. I was at this conference and I was in the audience, and this young 13-year-old girl comes onto the stage and she starts talking about how she found a way to remove lead from water. 13.
Wow.
And she needed $25,000 for her lab. And so she asked everyone to make a contribution. And I thought, you know what, someone might raise her, but she wasn't going to get to the 25. So I said, I'll give you 25. I sponsored her. She sent me a business plan that I've never, I mean, you can't even imagine the business plan she sent me. Like, spot on.
Yeah.
And now she's got people working for her. She's now 15 years old. But you never know where you're going to find the most, and she's from India.
Right.
Moved to Colorado with her family and heard on the news that there was a water problem with lead, so she decided she needed to fix it.
Right. And I think that you place this as like, right, it's the dedication of going in places where you wouldn't normally find us.
Yeah.
And the second part is putting our money where our mouth is. Because when you do get to the position of power, what we would consider, you know, a rounding error, I hate when that is said, because what we consider a rounding error in those communities is a wealth. It would really just magnify and amplify the ideas that community has. And so much of this is going to and truly humbling yourself for a moment, taking away those assumptions, right? And remembering that you are there often in service, right, of the people who often have the ideas but are just lacking the sponsorship. And I think we see that in the boardroom too. You know, when we see women, you know, coming in for mentorship, I often ask them, so you want me as a mentor, or do you want me as a sponsor? Who in your
I
network?
want you as my sponsor.
Who in your network is going to put their badge on the table when it comes to raise time, right? And if you don't have an answer to that, let's get an answer to that. You know, if you're looking for that, you know, that woman who's going to go in and say, because by the way, all of the things that happen in our career actually happen when we're not in the room. So the people that are in the room, you want to make sure that they are there to help sponsor you forward into that space. So when we talk about not just getting out into communities, but it's ensuring that when we have diversity, that we are acknowledging that there are pieces to this puzzle. And that when it comes to men actually have wonderful, robust sponsorship within their networks. And that's something that often women find hard to ask for, or don't even know that they have to ask for.
Well, it's because we don't play golf, so.
But wait a minute, we do get our hair done together.
Exactly.
That's my goal.
Elena, what solutions do you employ? Like, we all have power, which we talked about, to make a difference. How are you using it, and what are you doing?
Well, there are a couple of things. I think I will give something that is anybody can do in this room tomorrow, okay? One example, and I'm super proud I did it, and I will do more and more. And then, you know, some other things that are a bit broader, macro, in sort of like a scope. So a couple of years ago in Europe specifically, we had a refugee crisis. And it was coming from Syria, a lot of people displaced, and a lot of like labels being put on them, which is horrible. And one of the things we did was we basically said, look, come on, let's take a stand. And let's start, besides like building like a macro program that went across like 7 different countries in Europe that was providing an ability to connect refugees. Specifically, we started with Syria, but it went into Pakistan, Afghanistan, and other countries where the very smart, talented, well-educated people, when they come to Northern Europe or Western Europe, they end up, you know, picking up garbage because it's hard for them to connect with potential opportunities. You could have like a software developer, or you could have an accountant or a doctor. So at a macro sense, we built a platform that sort of enabled the connectivity between skilled professionals and opportunities, whether this is corporate world, education, or like micro-employment. So somebody wants to open up a restaurant, so I need to have access to funding, for example. So that was kind of a big, broad initiative that we led, and my team developed the actual platform on the cloud. But at a micro level, because we wanted to show, you know, let's drink our own Kool-Aid. We are not just talking about refugees. We brought in a couple of ladies, and one 22-year-old, already with 2 children from Damascus, educated accountant. She had, I mean, I don't want to talk about the journey in the past. It's awful. I mean, you don't want to hear it. So she ended up in the Netherlands with her husband and 2 small children, and she went to one of the kind of like social events. She said, look, come on, I'm an accountant. I want to learn the language. Give me a chance. And the chance we gave her, she joined us as a working student to start. We came up with and it was like, the whole firm was like, what are you doing? I mean, how does it work? I mean, what is it? She joined my team for a year. She helped develop this platform. She went to all of these communities, as you're talking about, and her being the insider, not having any problem with the languages, but also being a young lady. Her husband, by the way, just decided to stay home. No offense, he was so he was just so intimidated by the Western world, he would barely leave the house. She, on the other hand, totally embraced it. She's like, no, hey, I have brains. I'm going to connect. I'm going to join this culture. And so she worked for us for a year and helped us kind of develop this platform and make impact on so many lives, including her own. And now she got like certified accountancy degree. She's fluent in the language. She has a wonderful life, and like a couple of newspaper articles about her. And that was nice. That just felt good. And yeah, we're glad we did it.
That's great.
So yeah, and in general, I think my conclusion from that, first of all, like you said, put your assumptions aside somewhere, you know, don't bring them into your room, but also give people chances and just do it. Just do it. Just trust people that, you know, intentionally, you know, people are genuinely positive and good. They are not there to like do bad things intentionally.
Well,
The vast majority of people
vast
are.
majority.
Yes.
You just need to give them chances.
But you used the right word, intentional. Be
Yeah.
intentional.
Yeah,
You know, be
exactly.
conscious.
Just do it. Yeah.
I think that, okay, so
Yeah.
let's go to, and I'm going to let everyone ask questions, so start thinking of some goodies. But let's go into really our predictions. We talk a lot about 2025. Of course, 2020, important year, 100-year anniversary of women's rights to vote, very important. But 2025, all of our predictions are kind of based on the 2025. What's your prediction for the workplace and the workforce
in 2025? What does it look like?
I would say maybe 2030. I would like to, 2025, we may not get where I would love to see the future, but 50-50 at least. Boardroom positions, leadership positions, equality, enablement, 50-50. And and I think it's very doable. I think it's very doable. I cannot speak for the rest, for everywhere in the world, but I would think in the Western world, it's very doable, 50-50. 50-50 everything.
And do you think business will change with 50-50, or is it just a nice to have?
Oh, I think business will change. I think one of the things that I see it's actually funny to watch. I have a number of guys working on the team, and they say, I actually prefer to have a lady in charge, because there are certain things that it's not again women versus men, nothing. But you tend to just kind of, I think women are more naturally connectors. So I think the business will change, and I think business is already drawing all of the boundaries between the industries, between what you studied in your school, because just because you studied semiconductor engineering, it just doesn't, it's not enough, because the technologies now, you blur all the boundaries. And I think it's perfect, because you need to be prepared that things are blurred. Whether it's your skill, whether it's your interaction, whether it's a team, this whole thing about cross-functional teams, forget about it. It's here. It's real. Don't write books about how to build a team like this. Live it. Accept it. It's around you.
It's not in a textbook, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's just something that you have to admire. You have to be ready. And I think you also need to accept that we as humans will change because of technology. Because, the technology will enable us to think and do things that are actually more value add as opposed to administrative things. I fully embrace anything that's like automated, robotized. And I think as people will probably become a little bit more purposeful driven, which is also another good thing.
I think so.
Yeah.
What about you, Joanna?
For me, I never make predictions, but I'll tell you the intent that I see out in the world that I hope ends up being paid off, and that we want to make sure that we are facilitating the success of. One of them happens to be in the area of utilizing artificial intelligence, machine learning, voice technologies in new and inventive ways when it comes to our climate crisis. So there's a tremendous amount of work going on there. I have met so many people here at reInvent that are actually playing in this space, utilizing our technologies, who are already in the place of purpose-driven invention. The other part is taking on economic injustices. And I think that one in and of itself, whether we talk about equal pay, what it is for Latinx, what it is for women of color, taking a look at it systemically.
Just for the record, on average, women make 80 cents on the dollar, Black women 64 cents on the dollar, Latinas 53 cents on the dollar, just to level set. Okay.
Absolutely. And so some of the work that I have seen come together is women from all of those communities deciding that we're done. We no longer accept that as the status quo, and what are the technologies that we can utilize, one, to audit companies, to find out whether or not they actually have a pay gap, and then to institute what often is a correction within their own companies. And so to see women doing that gives me a tremendous amount of hope. And I think the third one, we talked about the ecological, the economic, and then there's the social piece of it, right? It's the social part that binds us all. And when I think about 2030 and even 2050, when it comes to IoT, you and I are in this business of connecting people. What we know for sure is that those connections, everyone will be connected to everything. And what I get very excited about is seeing,
Because you're passionate.
I'm incredibly passionate about, is seeing people really understanding the implications behind those connections. That it isn't enough to put a platform out there that gives you the ability to tweet or to to connect via live video, but what is the inevitable intent of the next wave of machines that we create that can go to helping unite our social fabrics, to preserve our cultural differences and actually celebrate them as opposed to homogenize them.
Yes.
And to me, that's some of the exciting work that I've seen just in the last week here.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. All right, so let's wrap on a question, then we'll take some questions. What is the best advice you can give to the next generation coming in, which I believe is the now generation, next generation. The next generation is
They're here.
leading now.
They're here.
They're all here. So what's your best piece of advice?
Why don't you start?
Well, I think number one, continue to learn. It's just learning. It's not the textbooks learning or reading a website or attending a course. What I call learning is there are technical learning and there is a social kind of the whole understanding other people learning and continue just kind of evolve yourself. That's number one. I think number two is that you need to give others a chance. And you need to genuinely just support what you say and do what you say. And when it comes to, let's say, women leadership, people leaving this room either find a sponsor and a mentor or become one. And I think it just makes such a huge difference. Yeah.
For me, I think some of the advice that I give to the people in the room and the folks listening in and the now generation, those Gen Zers that just fuel me. They fuel me. Their ideas get me so
Fuel.
It is. They give me fuel and hope because
Code switch, fuel me.
There you go. And so much of it is around that they're asking questions. They're approaching their educations in a place of lifelong learning. As opposed to going, I'm going to get this degree, I'm going to check that box, and then I'm going to get this magical job that's going to magically pay me $1 million. That's not the way the world works. We know that. And so much of the world is understanding that, that when you get into that first job, it is seeking out the help, that it is okay to ask for help, because there are plenty of people. Often, they're not always women. Some, I would say in my own career, many of my sponsors have been men, right? That wanted to work shoulder to shoulder with me and try to figure out something for the future. So, look to the unlikely places. And the most important part is actually take a risk. Safe is actually the worst play you could do. When you take a risk, I kind of look at it as like that actually safety is the new risk.
Safety
right?
is so boring.
Exactly.
Seriously, like we got to get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
When you get uncomfortable, you actually do something.
And standing up for what you believe in. If your company is doing or has a practice in place that you don't believe in, stand up to it. There are many times where people that I have worked with or people that I have worked for may have been behaving in a way that I felt really uncomfortable with. And I think having the courage to actually stand up if somebody interrupts another woman in a conference room or on a conference call, actually saying, being able to redirect that conversation back to the woman so they can finish their idea, or elevating that idea, or helping unmansplain something. We could go on and on about some of the social fabric things that we have to change and teach. But I think that in placing yourself in the place of conviction and taking the risk, because for some people it is a risk to actually stand up and say something, know that there are plenty of people who have done it before you, and there are plenty of people just on this stage and in this room that will be there to help guide you into, that was a really big risk, now what, right? So stand for what you believe in and align your values to the companies that you work for and your beliefs, because otherwise it gets really tough.
Anyways, no risk, no reward.
That's right, and that's absolutely
Okay, let's
true.
see if there's a question. Any questions out here?
you had mentioned, we all know about the pay gap, right? And there's ways that we could work on changing legislation to enable that.
Can you talk just a little louder?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's legislation and things in place that they're trying to get out there to kind of close that gap. I'm curious, though, about this, what your thoughts are on the systemic kind of like career long-term trajectory for people, because if we close that gap right away, do we have systemic things that are actually preventing women from being successful long-term, like just the way that companies reward people? Do you have any thoughts on where we might go with that?
Sure, I'll take that one on. First of all, just because we pass the law, I think we've found in even our own communities, we can pass civil rights, but do we have civil rights? We tend to have to be vigilant, and I think it's really important that when we talk about that and talk about our, women as underrepresented voices or coming from an underrepresented voice community, that we understand that it's not a one and done, right? That when I talked earlier about showing up in communities, it's not about showing up, writing a check, and then leaving. It's actually about going in and ensuring that you have a dedication to the problem space. And so when we think about the wage gap, let's say companies commit to actually writing the necessary check. How do you begin to create checks and balances? And I think that's one of the things that I'm seeing in companies, even in our own company. I happen to be the head of the board of the Women in Design, right? And so much of the conversations we are often having is, do we have the necessary mechanisms in place, right, to ensure that those systemic barriers are taken care of? Because every company has mechanisms within them. And so you want to understand that it isn't enough to write the check, but it's important to examine the systemic machinery inside of the company and begin to dismantle things that actually cause the originating problem. And that takes time. And it takes patience, but it also, I think we live in a data age that you can make those cases now, right? And so if you just took hiring practices and ensuring that when you do hiring of an individual or people are coming in from underrepresented communities, that they are reflected in the people that are interviewing them as well. Right? You start looking at those mechanisms like, how did we put this panel together to actually make sure that this particular candidate was somebody that would meet our company's leadership principles? And so you start to think about those mechanisms, ensuring that every single one of them systemically begins to work cohesively. What I will tell you is that it's not a one and done, right? The wage gap is step number one. Step number two, right, in that is then examining the internal mechanisms that you've got, right, to ensure that we don't take steps backwards. And then you start to look at what are those things that will go step by step. And there's some really great thought leadership, actually by our friend Joanna Barsh on this, that talks about the systemic way that you would climb a mountain and how do you sustain that change over time. So if you go take a look at her book, one of the things she actually covers in there is putting together those teams of the people with the right intent to actually take on some of these really big systemic problems.
So I'm going to pause for a minute, Helena. I'm going to see if there's other questions so that we can get more
There is
questions.
another question here.
Okay.
So I have a question. So the goal for 2025 or whether it be 2030, it's exciting. And I actually would want to believe in it, and I try to support it at my workplace. But coming...
Can you put the microphone a little towards your mouth? We can't
Yeah.
hear you. Thank you.
So, but coming here has been I would say, has shaken that belief, because when I look at the number of women here at this conference, I mean, it's hard for me to believe 2030 or 2050, I mean, I'm kind of disturbed actually looking at the number of women here, So it's not a question, but it's just an observation, and I would like to hear your thoughts on it,
Yeah, we were at a women leadership luncheon. It was a joke that, hey, first time it was there, it was like 10 ladies and then 20, and now we have 110. So think about that. There is actually a hockey stick effect that's growing, but to exactly what she said, it takes time. And I think probably a couple of years ago, there is sort of a general recognition of there is awareness that we don't necessarily have the right proportions of ladies in the field or in the position. But at the same time, now it's known. And not to change the topic, but to kind of add a little bit, we have programs within Deloitte that are run globally, sponsored by a global CEO, that is all about diversity and inclusion. And 2 years ago, when the programs were announced, ladies within Deloitte were a little bit like, ow. So now, since you're going to be making a bias towards a lady to be promoted over a guy, does it mean that you promote me because I'm a lady versus I actually have all of the best capabilities? So we had a lot of this conversation. It was like almost kind of this effect in the room, and in a number of our country firms, like, okay, it feels almost wrong. At the same time, if we don't have the programs and the way we understood it all and how our leadership is driving this top down is that if we don't have a program, we will never take into consideration that there may be subconscious biases about how the decisions are being made, to how the committee is formed, et cetera, et cetera. If we don't make it take a stand, if we don't make people aware, if we don't make it programmatic and systematic, we'll never start improving those matrices of having more ladies. And attracting the talent, hiring techniques. If I have 2 resumes, exactly the same technical skills in front of me, I will hire a lady tomorrow. So you need to take actions. And now, 2 years, these programs are running. I feel like we are improving. And I think all of the large corporates and organizations just need to take a stand, follow through, have leadership support, and approach this as a program. Because if we don't talk about it, it's going to be just silent and not acknowledged. So same example with lunch over 3 years, from 10 to 110. This is great. It's an improvement. Still, you know, if you just do percentage-wise, it's still not 50-50, but it's bigger. And I think I would challenge you, if you look back at the attendance 3 or 4 years ago of reInvent, the percentage of ladies was lower than it is today. So I believe that we are moving in the right direction. Is it fast enough? Probably not. But it's about acknowledging and taking action.
I think, you know, Joanna started with data, and we have great technology to collect the data. And then Elena talked about being conscious. And, you know, for me, I say equality is a choice, unconscious bias is an excuse. If you use the word unconscious, you're conscious. So once you're conscious, you need to make a choice.
That's right.
Best way for change, you want to see a bigger percentage here next year, invite 4 friends.
Exactly.
Bring 4 girlfriends. If every woman here brought 4 girlfriends, your equation would change in a minute. Don't wait and watch. Just make shit happen.
And invite them all to IoT sessions, because IoT is for everyone.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's get another question. And
So
then
that assumes that we have 4 co-workers that are female, but just saying. I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm loving this conversation, but I often find myself in somewhat of an echo chamber, where the people participating in conversations like this are already aware of the challenges and the problems, and management is doing their thing, but there's also a pretty pervasive culture of people who give career advice that is not necessarily in line with what we're all talking about. Like, you got to be selfish, and you got to ask for that project, and you got to do this. Like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
So I wonder if you have any thoughts on that situation.
Oh, yeah.
So the first time, and I've heard very similar career advice, and that is certainly not in my character. And it felt like somebody was asking me to be a different gender, actually, than to be my own. And so I wanted to be rewarded for being a woman in design, not for being a woman acting like a man in design. And I think one of the things that we have to do, and I think that we are certainly seeing the beginnings and the outlines of it, is systemic education with many of our male colleagues that understands that we lead differently, right? We have different characteristics, and then we expect the language and the lexicon to celebrate our style of leadership. And I think that's a real core importance. The second part of that is getting out of the echo chamber. I talked a little bit about getting into communities, but it's also you just facing up to some folks who don't believe that there's still a problem. Or, I'll speak with folks that, particularly in different generation categories, that will say, well, that was a problem we fixed in the first women's movement, right? So, sometimes it's a bit of a re-education that, yes, we moved the needle, but we're not at the goal. And I think the most important thing that we can do as women in this space is set incredibly bold goals. 50-50 ain't enough in my book. That's not bold enough. What about 70-30? What if you walked into a room and you were like, wow, we start to think about those things and go, wait a minute, if we only think that the goal is here, we may miss that. And so when you set bolder goals for yourself and for, I think, the organizations around you, I think it's really critical. And then you can begin to actually bring in systemic education. Particularly, we have so many ambassadors in our Amazonian world, in our Two Pizza Team world, that you would think, there aren't enough women. But what you find is there's kind of a league of heroes, superheroes in this space that want to participate. And we have to do a much better job of educating.
Yeah, listen, I'm known as the chief troublemaker. I think the rules, if they don't work, you got to dump them and create new ones and hold yourselves accountable. Leadership is not just CEO down, and gender equality is not a female issue. It's a social and economic issue. It is not a male issue. It is not a male problem. It is not a female problem. It's all of our challenges to work together to create the changes that we want to see and to create accountability, measurement for accountability, because that's how we can keep raising the bar. I will get you coffee any day, anytime.
Oh,
and thank you all for joining this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.